Mr. Durham, I've got a number of things I want to ask you, but do you desire to address what was being raised just now in fairness?
Yeah, apparently Mr. Schiff's questions are from an unsourced New York Times article written by Charlie Savage. I don't believe that there's anything in that article that is attributed to Ms. Danahy. And my recollection, I could be mistaken, but my recollection is that Ms. Danahy did not comment, wasn't quoted in any way in that article. So to the extent that the New York Times wrote an article suggesting certain things, it is what it is.
All right. Was Danchenko's status as a paid informant, a confidential human source, concealed from you for any period of time?
I'm not sure that was concealed. We found that out. We were once.
When did you learn about it?
When we started the investigation and how long it took for the FBI to identify this principal subsource and why the principal subsource wasn't identified earlier. That's when we came across Danchenko. We then asked the Bureau for, we found out he was a confidential human source. We asked the Bureau for his informant file, and that's when we gleaned that information. Okay,
so it was from his informant file once you got that from the FBI. Was there any delay in furnishing that to you?
Not that I recall, no.
Do you have any recollection? You were investigating, you said, from May 2019. He was a CHS until October 2020.
Yes.
You know when in that period of time, roughly, you learned that he was a CHS?
Probably halfway through there, but I'm not certain.
Okay. Why didn't you interview him while he was a paid source for the FBI?
Let me see. So with respect to Mr. Danchenko, he was interviewed by the Bureau in January 2017. We had brought to the attention of the new administration and the FBI, Mr. Danchenko's circumstances, including the prior espionage case that they never resolved or addressed.
Right. I understand all those details. I'm asking why you didn't interview him.
So when we were dealing with that section, Mr. Danchenko was represented by counsel. Mr. Danchenko, as you may know in the normal course, you have to advise people whether they're subjects or targets of investigations, and we did not arrive at a point where we could interview Mr. Danchenko.
FBI made Danchenko a CHS on March 7, 2017, after the factual predicate for Crossfire Hurricane in the Steele dossier had collapsed in January 2017 in his interview because he could not corroborate the dossier, and he revealed to the FBI that he was not a Russian-based source, nor did he have a high-level network of sources. The next day, March 8, the FBI finalized talking points drafted by Lisa Page on direction of Andrew McCabe for use in briefing the Gang of Eight in Congress. And Congress was briefed prior to Director Comey's testimony on March 20. Now, Attorney General Barr told the nation in December 2019 that you were examining the continuation of the investigation beyond the January collapse of the supposed factual basis and looking at irregularities, misstatements, and omissions. Yet your report makes no mention of the March 8 talking points prepared for Congress. Why?
Aware that there were talking points because it just wasn't part of the crux, the central portion of what we were reporting on.
I want the clerk to put up on the screen what is my submittal mark number 7 while I'm asking you this question. These talking points emerged into public as a defense exhibit in the Sussman case. They contained lurid allegations about Manafort operating high-level contacts with the Kremlin through Carter Page, that Steele had a primary subsource who was Russian-based, and that the primary subsource had a network of high-level Republican subsources. Same garbage that Danchenko had debunked in his January interview. These talking points were circulated among senior FBI leaders and Department of Justice leaders, more than a dozen passed on them. Did you interview them all about how this could occur or consider this material as the basis of prosecutable offenses?
We identified and interviewed many people in the FBI. I guess I would have to know who this particular email was circulated to be able to tell you whether we interviewed each of those persons or not.
Last point, I guess, because I'm about out of time. You identify the failure of the FBI to interview Dolan as sort of inexplicable. Totally agree. But as I go through your report and look, there are people who declined to be interviewed, not only Dolan, Danchenko, McComey, McCabe, Priestap, Struck, Page, Glenn Simpson, among others. It seems inexplicable to me that you didn't compel their testimony. Can you explain that at all?
First, let me make it clear that it is as disappointing, perhaps more disappointing to me and my colleagues, that these people would not agree to be interviewed. Some of them had a lot to say publicly, but they refused to be interviewed by our folks. Let me explain. I'm not going to speak to any particular person because I don't want to violate any rules, but let me give you the general kinds of considerations that go into these things. First of all, the only way in which you can compel, as it were, a person's testimony would be to get a court order after somebody has asserted the Fifth Amendment privilege. So one factor, and there are multiple factors I'll go through here, but one factor is that a grand jury subpoena doesn't give a federal prosecutor the authority to simply force people to talk about things that the prosecutor, or in this instance, the investigative reviewers, might be interested in. In order to properly use a grand jury subpoena, you need to have an active grand jury investigation that's ongoing and a reasonable belief to believe that the person that you want to have come in has relevant information about that information. Otherwise, you run up against claims of grand jury abuse or claims of trying to set a perjury trap or other bad faith reasons. So you can't just subpoena people to make them talk. You can subpoena people when you believe that they have relevant information. So that's a factor. We also take into consideration if a person has previously refused to cooperate, they won't cooperate with you on matters, even matters that they previously talked about. And on prior occasions, those people have repeatedly said, I don't recall, I don't remember, and so forth and so on. You have to make this sort of prudential judgment. Well, okay, if you were to subpoena a person because you can make an argument that they have information that might be relevant to the investigation, is it going to be worth the effort to have them come in and then repeatedly say, I don't recall, I don't recall? You look at the most sensitive piece of information that you all saw in the classified information, right? That source. Mr. Comey was asked about that in a congressional hearing under oath, and he didn't recall it.
Understood.
So you make the decision, okay, are we likely to get something or not?
Mr. Chair.
We over?
Yep.
All right.
Gentleman